Avoidant psychology. You walking away changed them. When you walked away from your avoidant, you did something that every previous relationship, every therapy conversation, every moment of insight, every good intention had failed to accomplish. You created the specific conditions under which genuine psychological change in avoidance becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Not because your departure was strategic, not because you planned its effects, not because you understood the mechanisms it would activate, but because your genuine choice to stop accepting insufficient treatment initiated a sequence in their psychology that nothing else could have started. What your walking away actually was to their system. Before understanding what your walking away changed in them, it's essential to understand what it represented to their psychological system at the moment of departure, because their system's interpretation of your leaving determined everything that followed. Previous experiences of relationship endings in their life had been processed by their system as confirmation of existing predictions. When they created distance and someone left, their system registered. Distance creation works to manage relationship intensity. When they were inconsistent and someone left after extended tolerance, their system registered. Their tolerance was finite, but long. When relationships ended through mutual attrition, their system registered. Relationships naturally conclude, this is manageable. Your walking away was processed differently because of the specific conditions that surrounded it. You left not because of their most recent behavior, not because of a specific incident, not after a dramatic confrontation. You left because you reached a genuine decision about your own worth and what you required. A decision that their system had been watching form across time and had assessed as increasingly serious, but had continued betting wouldn't produce action. When your decision produced action, when the departure happened as a genuine expression of genuine self-respect, rather than as a tactic, a test, or a temporary withdrawal designed to produce their response, their system encountered something it had no adequate interpretation for. You had demonstrated that your self-worth was real and non-negotiable, in a way that their system's previous experience with relationship endings hadn't prepared it for. This is the first thing your walking away changed. The fundamental data in their system about what people do when they love someone, and that someone isn't giving them what they need. Their system's model had been, people who love avoidance accommodate their limitations indefinitely, and when that accommodation ends, it ends in the specific forms the system has encountered before: pursuit that eventually gives up, departure that announces itself with sufficient warning to be managed, endings that confirm the avoidance narrative about the relationship's incompatibility. Your departure didn't fit any of these categories. Their system had to create a new category for what happened when you left, and the creation of that new category was the first change. The first change. Their model of themselves was broken. Avoidants carry specific models of themselves in relationship, detailed predictions about how they function, what they're capable of, how others experience them, and what the consequences of their patterns are. These models are constructed from accumulated relational experience and maintained through the specific confirming evidence that their management of relationships provides. Their model included a specific prediction about you. It included the prediction that you would continue accommodating their patterns because you had been accommodating them, and because people who love avoidance typically continue accommodating them past the point where they've signaled they won't. The model had incorporated your tolerance into its architecture and was operating on the prediction that tolerance of this specific kind was sustainable indefinitely. When you left, the prediction failed. This is a specific type of event in any predictive system, a significant prediction failure that the system can't route around or minimize because the prediction was central rather than peripheral. It's not that they predicted correctly and something random happened. They predicted incorrectly about something they were highly confident about, and the incorrectness produced a consequence they weren't prepared for. Significant prediction failures in complex systems don't just update the specific failed prediction. They initiate broader audits of the assumptions that generated the failed prediction. Their system couldn't update "you won't actually leave" without also examining, what else have I been predicting incorrectly about this relationship? And what does the failure of this prediction reveal about the accuracy of my model of myself in relationship? The audit generated by this prediction failure was the first genuine revision of their self-model in years. Not because they decided to examine themselves, not because they received feedback they acknowledged, but because the specific failure of a central prediction created the mandatory audit that their system couldn't avoid running. The self-model that emerged from this audit was different from the one that existed before your departure. Not completely different, not transformed overnight, not suddenly accurate in all the ways it had been inaccurate, but changed, specifically changed in the ways that the prediction failures audit revealed as inaccurate. They now have a self-model that includes, I am capable of driving away someone who genuinely loves me, in a way that is viscerally real rather than abstractly possible. This is a change that your walking away created, and that nothing else would have. The second change. The real consequences of their patterns became undeniable. Avoidants have lived their entire relational adult life in a specific relationship with the consequences of their patterns, knowing about them abstractly without feeling them concretely. They can describe their patterns. Some have read about avoidant attachment, can identify their behaviors, can articulate the impact those behaviors theoretically have on people who care about them. This abstract knowledge has never changed anything, because knowledge without felt consequence is information without motivational weight. Your walking away converted the abstract knowledge into felt consequence for the first time. Not talked about consequence, not described consequence, not the theoretical understanding that their patterns have costs, the specific, physical, daily, present tense experience of what it feels like when their patterns have produced their natural result, and that result is your absence. This conversion from abstract to felt consequence is one of the most significant changes your departure created, because it's the change that makes all other changes possible. Genuine psychological transformation doesn't originate from intellectual understanding. It originates from the specific motivational force that only felt consequences produce. Their patterns had lacked this motivational weight. Your departure provided it. The felt consequence of their patterns isn't a single experience they had once and processed. It's an ongoing daily reality that renews itself across every domain of their life that your presence was affecting. Every morning that begins with the specific quality of starting without you. Every evening that ends with the specific emptiness that your absence has created in the time that your presence had been occupying. Every experience that reaches for you before their system reminds them you're not there. This daily renewal of the felt consequence is doing work in their psychology that their intellectual understanding of their patterns never could. It's connecting cause and effect in their nervous system at the level where behavior change originates, not in their cognitive understanding of what they should do differently, but in their organism's experience of what their patterns actually cost. Their body is learning what their mind already knew, and the body's learning is the learning that changes behavior. The specific change this produced in them is the conversion from, I know my patterns have consequences, to, I feel what my patterns have cost. This conversion is irreversible. Once the consequences are felt at this level, the previous state of abstract knowing without felt experience cannot be fully restored. They carry the felt consequence now in a way that will inform their psychology indefinitely, regardless of what happens with your relationship. The third change. The illusion of their independence was permanently broken. Among the most central components of avoidant identity is the belief in their own genuine independence, the conviction that their self-sufficiency is real rather than defensive, that their ability to function without intimate connection reflects actual autonomy rather than psychological limitation, that needing no one specifically is evidence of emotional sophistication rather than emotional impairment. Your walking away and the period following it has been providing sustained, comprehensive, unavoidable evidence that this belief is false in the specific form they held it. They're discovering that their independent functioning is qualitatively different without you than it was with you. Not absent, they're still functioning, still capable, still managing their life. But the specific quality of their functioning has changed in ways their independence narrative can't account for without revision. The ease that certain things had, the meaning that specific experiences carried, the regulatory stability that their baseline maintained. All of these are different in your absence in ways that point toward the same conclusion. You were providing something their independence narrative told them they weren't receiving. The specific form of the illusion that has been broken is the belief that needing someone specific for optimal psychological functioning is something that happens to other people, more emotionally vulnerable, less developed people, but not to them. Their experience since your departure is providing irrefutable evidence that they needed you specifically, in ways that were real, and that your absence has made functionally visible. This broken illusion is a permanent change, because it's not a belief that can be reinstated once the evidence against it has accumulated to this level. They can't believe in their complete independence in the same way they believed in it before, because the evidence against it lives now in their own experience of your absence, rather than in anyone's argument about their patterns. The change this creates isn't the replacement of their independence with dependence, or the development of anxious attachment from avoidant attachment. It's more specific and more useful. The integration of the reality that genuine human interdependence is part of their psychological architecture, rather than an imposition on their natural state. This integration is the beginning of the specific transformation that makes genuinely different relationship possible. Not just relationship managed differently from the same defensive foundation, but relationship approached from a foundation that has honestly incorporated their actual needs. The fourth change. They experienced what genuine loss actually feels like. Avoidants have a specific history with loss, a history characterized by the management of loss rather than its genuine experience. Previous relationship endings were managed through narrative construction that made the ending inevitable or mutual or for the best, replacement that prevented the full weight of absence from registering, the specific efficiency with which their system routes emotional content away from consciousness before it reaches the intensity that would require genuine processing. Your walking away initiated genuine loss of a kind their management system couldn't adequately process or prevent from registering at full weight. The specific reasons your departure produced genuine rather than managed loss are connected to everything described above. You were specifically irreplaceable in ways that prevented replacement from providing the usual relief. The prediction failure created too significant a system disruption for efficient routing away from consciousness. The felt consequences were too pervasive across too many daily domains to be contained by narrative construction, and the broken independence illusion meant that the loss couldn't be minimized into the manageable loss of something peripheral. What genuine loss feels like when experienced rather than managed is something their psychological history had prevented them from knowing. They knew loss in the managed form, the residue that remains after the routing and the narrative construction and the replacement attempts have done their work. They hadn't known loss in the unmanaged form, the raw, present, specific grief of having had something genuinely precious and having genuinely lost it through their own choices. This experience of genuine loss is one of the most significant changes your walking away created, because it permanently expands their emotional knowledge in ways that will inform every subsequent relationship they have. They now know what it feels like when they love someone specifically and genuinely, and lose them specifically and genuinely. This knowledge lives in their body in a way that the abstract understanding of loss never did. They will not be able to encounter someone they care about losing without this knowledge being present and informing their choices in ways it couldn't before they had it. The change isn't that they become perfectly regulated emotionally or that they'll never have avoidant responses again. It's that their emotional knowledge now includes the specific, felt, genuine experience of loss, which gives them access to the specific motivational information that makes different choices possible. They know what it costs now. They didn't know before. The fifth change, their priorities were reorganized by reality. Avoidants have a specific hierarchy of priorities that their defensive system maintains. Their psychological safety first, their autonomy second, their relationships third, their genuine feelings fourth. This hierarchy isn't consciously chosen. It's the functional expression of how their system weights competing values when they're in conflict. Your walking away created the specific conditions under which this hierarchy encountered the full consequences of its operation. They chose their psychological safety over genuine relationship, their need for distance over your need for presence, their autonomy over mutual accommodation, their managed feelings over their authentic ones. And the consequence of these choices, experienced now in your absence, is providing direct evidence about whether this hierarchy serves them in the way they implicitly believed it did. The evidence is consistent and it points in one direction. The hierarchy that prioritized psychological safety above everything else produced the specific outcome of having the safety while losing the person. And the experience of having the safety while having lost you is not what their system predicted safety would feel like. Their system predicted that maximum safety would produce maximum stability, maximum comfort, maximum well-being. What it actually produced is the specific misery of having protected themselves into losing what they most needed. This is priority reorganization through direct experience rather than through intellectual persuasion. No amount of being told that their priorities are misaligned would have produced this change. But their own daily experience of what their priority hierarchy's consequences actually feel like is producing something that arguments couldn't: genuine reconsideration of whether the hierarchy serves them. The reorganization isn't complete and isn't permanent in any guaranteed sense. Their system's priorities don't reverse overnight through a single experience, even when that experience is significant. But the reconsideration is genuine, and genuine reconsideration creates the possibility of genuine reorganization that didn't exist when the hierarchy was operating without providing the specific evidence of its consequences that your departure has created. The change is, their system can no longer operate with the same confidence that psychological safety at the cost of genuine connection is the optimal available outcome. The cost of the safety they chose is now felt daily, and this felt cost is the information that genuine priority reorganization requires. The sixth change: their narrative about you was dismantled. Avoidants construct specific narratives about relationships that serve their management systems, narratives that make the current arrangement understandable, that frame their distance as reasonable, that attribute the relationship's difficulties to dynamics or incompatibilities or circumstances, rather than to their defensive patterns. They had a narrative about you, about why the relationship was what it was, about what your presence in it required of them, about why maintaining the specific level of distance they maintained was reasonable or necessary, or even good for both of you. This narrative was doing genuine psychological work, organizing their experience of the relationship into a story that preserved their self-image and made their choices appear as something other than fear, driving them away from what they genuinely wanted. Your walking away dismantled this narrative in a specific and irreversible way. The narrative didn't account for your departure. It was built on an implicit assumption of your continued presence, an assumption so deep that its presence in the narrative's architecture wasn't even visible until your departure revealed it by removing the foundation the narrative was built on. When narratives collapse because the implicit assumptions they were built on proved false, the collapse isn't partial. You can't rebuild a narrative around a false foundation by adjusting the surface. The narrative has to be rebuilt from scratch, and rebuilding requires re-examining the events and choices and dynamics that the original narrative was organized around. This re-examination is a change, not just in what narrative they hold now, but in the specific process of having had to examine the original narrative closely enough to see where it failed, which means seeing the actual events, choices, and dynamics clearly rather than through the narrative's organizing lens. They saw themselves more clearly during the narrative reconstruction than the original narrative allowed. And having seen themselves more clearly, their subsequent self-knowledge includes what that clearer seeing revealed. The narrative that exists now, the story they're constructing about what happened between you, why you left, what their choices cost, is necessarily more honest than the one that existed before. Not completely honest. Their system still has interests in specific framings that serve their self-image, but more honest, specifically in the ways that your departure made the old narrative's distortions impossible to maintain. The seventh change: their relationship with themselves was permanently altered. All of the changes described above converge on this final and most significant change. The specific relationship between the avoidant and their own psychological reality has been permanently altered by the experience of your walking away and everything that followed. Before your departure, they were in a specific relationship with themselves characterized by managed distance from their own emotional truth, a relationship that allowed them to know certain things abstractly while remaining at comfortable remove from those things as felt realities. This managed distance from themselves served the same function as their managed distance from others. It protected them from the specific vulnerability that full contact with their own emotional reality would create. Your walking away initiated a process that progressively reduced this managed distance from themselves. The prediction failure required self-examination. The felt consequences of their patterns eliminated the comfortable gap between knowing and feeling. The broken independence illusion demanded integration of actual needs. The genuine loss experience expanded their emotional knowledge, whether their system endorsed the expansion or not. The priority reorganization challenged their system's confident operation on its existing hierarchy. The narrative dismantling required them to see themselves more clearly than the narrative allowed. Each of these changes individually represents a reduction in their managed distance from their own psychological truth. Together, they represent a comprehensive closing of the gap between their managed self-presentation and their actual psychological reality, a closing that their system didn't choose and that your walking away made unavoidable. The altered relationship with themselves is visible in specific ways if you were able to observe them. They're engaging with their own emotional material more directly than before. Not perfectly, not without their system's continued presence and continued influence, but more directly. The specific processing work that genuine loss initiates is making them engage with their own inner life in ways that their previous managed distance prevented. They know things about themselves they didn't know before. They feel things about themselves they managed away from before. They're in closer, more honest, more direct relationship with who they actually are. This change is the most significant because it's the change that makes all other changes possible to maintain and develop. Self-model revisions that aren't supported by genuine self-knowledge tend to decay back toward the original model. Priority reorganizations that aren't supported by genuine felt experience of consequences tend to revert when the felt experience diminishes. Narrative reconstructions that aren't supported by genuine self-examination tend to become new narratives that serve the same defensive functions as the old ones. The altered relationship with themselves provides the foundation that makes the other changes durable rather than temporary. Because genuine self-knowledge, once developed through genuine experience, doesn't revert to ignorance even when the system would prefer the comfort of its previous managed distance. What these changes do not mean. Having described these changes and their significance, it's equally important to be clear about what they don't mean, both for your understanding of what walking away accomplished and for your honest assessment of what any future might contain. These changes do not mean they have become securely attached. The changes described are genuine and significant, but they're changes from a specific starting point in a specific direction. They're not arrival at a destination. The defensive architecture that created their avoidant patterns wasn't built in a moment and doesn't change in a moment. What your walking away did was initiate genuine change processes that their system is now running. Whether these processes run to completion, whether the changes deepen and stabilize, whether their attachment style genuinely shifts toward security, these are questions that only sustained time, continued genuine experience, and their own continued engagement with what their experience is teaching them can answer. These changes do not mean they will definitely behave differently in a future relationship with you or anyone else. Changes in psychological models, emotional knowledge, and self-understanding are prerequisites for behavioral change, not guarantees of it. Their system still has the capacity to override their new self-knowledge with its established defensive responses, particularly under conditions of significant intimacy and perceived threat. The changes make different behavior possible in a way it wasn't before. They don't make it automatic or inevitable. These changes do not mean that returning to a relationship with them would be advisable without specific additional evidence. Changed self-knowledge and genuinely different relationship behavior are related but distinct. The relationship they're now capable of imagining is informed by their changed understanding. Whether they can actually sustain different behavior in the conditions that a real relationship with you creates, where their specific attachment system encounters its specific triggers in the specific context where those triggers have previously reliably produced the patterns that led to your departure, is something that only genuine time and genuine behavioral evidence can demonstrate. These changes do not mean your walking away was for their benefit. Your walking away was for your benefit. The changes it created in them are genuine side effects of a genuine act of self-preservation and self-respect that you took for your own sake. The changes in them don't retroactively make your walking away about them, or convert your self-care into a therapeutic intervention you provided. What they do is provide accurate information about what your departure accomplished in their psychology for your own use in making whatever decisions about your life and your future serve you. What walking away changed in you. While this piece has focused on what your walking away changed in them, the most important changes are the ones it created in you, and these deserve naming with the same specificity as the changes in their psychology. You discovered the specific weight of your own self-respect in practice rather than in principle. You didn't just know you deserved better. You chose better despite the specific cost of that choice, in the specific context where the cost was most acute. This discovery, that your self-respect is real enough to act on when acting on it is genuinely difficult, is a permanent addition to your self-knowledge that no subsequent relationship can remove. You learned what you actually need rather than what you're willing to accept. The difference between these two things was invisible while you were accepting what you were getting. Your walking away created the conditions under which your actual needs became visible. Through the specific experience of having chosen to stop accepting their insufficiency and discovering what you felt in the aftermath of that choice. You developed the specific kind of strength that only comes from making genuinely difficult, genuine choices and living through their aftermath. Not the abstract strength of knowing you could leave, the specific, embodied, demonstrated through action strength of having left, having sustained the difficulty of leaving, and having arrived somewhere that your integrity supports. And you changed the fundamental information in your own system about what you'll accept from someone you love. Whatever relationship comes next, with this person on genuinely different terms or with someone different entirely, will be entered by someone whose system now includes the knowledge that they will genuinely act when treatment falls below their genuine requirements. This knowledge changes how you'll navigate every subsequent relationship encounter in ways that serve you permanently. The change that matters most. Among all the changes your walking away created, in them and in you, one is more significant than all the others combined. You both know now that your love is real enough to walk away from. This sounds paradoxical. Love is supposed to make you stay, not leave. But love that makes you stay regardless of treatment isn't the real thing. It's the hope of love, the attachment to the possibility of love, the specific wound that mistakes genuine love for the compulsion to remain in the presence of someone who sometimes provides it. Love that's real enough to walk away from is love that has genuine self-respect at its foundation. It's love that knows its own worth. It's love that understands that remaining in conditions that damage you doesn't honor the love. It damages it, along with everything else. When you walked away, you demonstrated that your love for yourself is as real as your love for them. And this demonstration changed something in both of you that only this specific demonstration could change. For them, the specific understanding that your love, genuine, deep, specific love for them, was not willing to be diminished by their patterns indefinitely. That the person who loved them was also someone who valued themselves. That genuine love looks like this, can make this choice, will honor itself in this way. For you, the specific knowledge that you can honor your love for yourself in the same breath as your love for them. That choosing yourself isn't a betrayal of the genuine feeling you had, but the most genuine expression of what that feeling deserved to exist within. Your walking away changed them in ways that years of patience, accommodation, and continued presence never could, because it provided the specific information their system couldn't ignore, couldn't route around, couldn't manage into something smaller than it was. It provided the irrefutable evidence of your genuine worth through your genuine willingness to choose it. And this evidence, now permanently part of their psychological reality, is the change that all the other changes were building toward. The knowledge of who you actually are, demonstrated in the most legible way possible, available to inform every choice they make about whether and how to show up for the possibility of what could exist between you.